So, speaking of Pete Alonso, now at this current moment, the Mets have yet to discuss a long term contract extension with Pete Alonso this offseason. But as for more from John Heyman's podcast, David Stearns also spoke on the upcoming free agency of Alonso and his future with the Mets. Stearns stated that Alonso is one of the best power hitters in baseball, and we are fortunate to have him. He's a homegrown player. He cares about our organization and clearly the fan base, and our organization cares about him. We'd love to keep that going for a long time. According to Jim Bowden of CBS Sports, the Mets' new front office under Stearns has indicated a desire for Alonso to finish his career as a Met. Alonso has told teammates that his preference is to spend the rest of his career with the Mets. That's usually a good sign. However, his agent Scott Boras has a long history of taking his clients to free agency versus signing an extension with their team. The Mets listened when teams called about Alonso, but were never seriously considering trading him, at least not yet. They could reevaluate the situation at the trade deadline, but likely will keep him through this season and then be willing to match the best offer he receives in free agency. Earlier this week, the Mets and Alonso settled at $20.5 million for 2024 to avoid arbitration with their star slugger. And as for across just 5 years in the majors, Alonso is already fourth all-time in home runs for Mets history, 10th in runs batted in, third in slugging percentage, fifth in OPS, and also leads the majors in home runs and runs batted in since his major league debut in 2019. Alonso is now 29 years old and is set to become a free agent after this upcoming season, represented by baseball's high roller, Scott Boras.
For years, I've been saying that he should have been extended. I think that the Mets could have saved themselves a lot of trouble if it was one of the first things they did once Steve Cohen took over. I mean, that's how highly I would have prioritized this move, because instead you decide to, like we said, get all these 40-year-olds, do all these other things, this, that, and the other. And now it's like, okay, look at the situation we're in. We could have not only saved ourselves time, stress, but in the long run, the Mets could have actually saved money if they did the extension before he continues to have great year after great year after great year, continually increasing his value. So they have approached this whole thing wrong. They could have fixed this a long time ago. They decided not to. And I said in the beginning that, we've seen Steve Cohen off these $300 million contracts that people haven't taken, but somehow they have a $10 million budget. The way I like to look at it is that I hope that when the opportunity presents itself, that's where the money really opens up. And I feel like once Alonso does hit free agency, that's where Steve Cohen's money has to open up. We already lost our Wheeler and, whoever else you want to mention. This is the guy they can't lose. I mean, like we've said, this guy has carried this team. He's been the heart and soul of this team. He's been really the only production they've had when it comes to actually scoring runs, which is the ultimate, we'll talk about run prevention, all this other stuff. Scoring runs is what matters. Like you said, most RBIs, that's what I love. I love those old man stats. Like, he brings in runs. So it's so important that I just think that, what, when it comes to free agency next season, no matter what, they've got to retain him. However, Stearns, whatever, that's just how it is. Because it's like we've talked about in the past, who's going to replace him? Like if you're, oh, we have Mark Vientos, we don't need Soler. Like, if you're already over that approach, now imagine what it looks like if you don't have Alonso too. Now it's like, okay, now what does your power really look like? The team would just, it wouldn't be a good team at all. Like, they already had a bad year. The team would be awful without him. And we've seen it in the win-loss record in the very limited amount of times when he's been hurt by other teams, not got injured, been hurt by other teams. We've seen how bad they are without him and the difference he makes when he's in the lineup versus out of the lineup. So it should just be the ultimate priority as far as keeping this guy. And obviously, Boras is going to make it go to free agency, and they're not going to be able to get the extension done. So I think that when the time comes next offseason, they just got to get it done as soon as possible just to get out of the way. Like, I'm glad they got the Nimmo thing out of the way early in the offseason this past year so it didn't linger too far on, towards February, January, things like that. I really want to see him do the same thing with Alonso. Whatever the number is, sure, go for it. He's not going to get 300 million, whatever. Like, if it's near the Matt Olson deal, perfect. We'll do that. That's great. And then you keep him, and then we're all done with this. Don't have to talk about it anymore. Because there really shouldn't be a discussion. Like, there shouldn't be a scenario where there isn't Alonso. And it's not so much the player but it's also the person and what he means to the team as far as a homegrown talent and being the spokesperson for this team. Like he does like so many other things that are not just on the baseball field that he should be a top priority to retain down in the future.
When I look at this Pete Alonso scenario, I'm not panicking yet. I really am not, because I think that we're in like this comfortable situation where we have seen Alonso prefer to stay with the Mets. He loves to be with the Mets. This is like his, maybe a little too much, but the whole situation with Scott Boras, we've seen him publicly say that, you know, the polar bear's not in any hibernation, whatever the bullshit he says. Boras and Alonso, they're not straying away from the possibility of signing an extension. They're not in any hibernation with that or whatever. We saw them settle at $20.5 million. Maybe there's a possibility where it's in the ballpark of the AAV that he would receive with a big contract extension. Maybe it might be like 23, 24 million, 25 million, something like that. So it's like in that somewhat ballpark. So I think that they got a little closer. But I did say, honestly, I said this on Twitter like a few days ago, I kind of want to see it not go through. So then it gave them a little bit more space and like more breathing room to discuss a possible extension. We've seen that with a few players in their last year of their contract that happened. I'm not worried about Pete Alonso leaving. Like, I think that there's a good chance at this current moment that he will stay and wants to stay. Right now, they're in a situation where they should not take it for granted that Boras is willing to listen. And I think that there are going to be contract extension talks. I don't think they're going to get far, but there has to be a point where the Mets need to gain common ground. And there should not be a situation where we hear 1 week before opening day, the Mets and Alonso have not discussed shit. Like that, I don't want to hear. That's when I'll start to panic a little bit, because then you're going to piss him off. And then you know, there's a possibility where, you know, he hits 70 home runs and you're going to be overpaying like 400 million for the guy. I need to see the Mets gain progress on this. I'm not expecting an extension to happen this offseason. I think we've all accepted that, but I need to see the Mets gain some ground on this with Boras, with Alonso, see what you have here. I think you got a decent benchmark in $20.5 million in his ARB3. Like having his ear right now for this year, like that is the only, like that's the only advantage that you have. Right now, I'm okay with it. Middle of January, having discussion extension. They still have tons of things to do in the offseason with their bullpen and other things. By the time it's opening day and we don't see a single update, that's when I'm starting to get nervous, because there wouldn't be any common ground that was gained at all throughout an entire offseason that you could have had these discussions.
There's been opportunities.
There have been.
So they only have themselves to blame for this. And the main thing is you just don't want to see another Jacob deGrom scenario where they knew they weren't going to keep him and don't trade him. You know what I mean? Like to lose him for nothing. Like, I would rather they traded him than lose it for nothing, ultimately, is what it comes down to.
You need to hear like, oh, the Mets offered this, he countered with this, the Mets offered this. Like, there has to be some kind of progress. Because if the Mets did not have any extension talks, with Boras already saying that we're not opposed to it, that's an issue. That is a 100% issue, and you're taking it for granted, because we all know how Scott Boras is.